Hello, my name is Dávur Magnussen, and I'm the principal trombone of the RSNO. With me, I have composer Jasper Dommett. Jasper is someone who we came across in our Composers Hub, which we have each year, where we announce let's call it a competition where people send in scores and we do workshops on them, and then we pick some of the pieces that do the best to perform. And Jasper's piece is one from this year's cohort. Number one, we have a common interest in that we're both brass players.
Yes.
But your piece, whenever I see a brass composer come, I think, yes, there's going to be tunes for us. But that's not the thing in your piece. Your piece, to me, has a very complicated sound world. It is, there's so many things to listen to. So, when you listen to your music, is there something particular you want us to listen out for?
As a composer, you get so absorbed into your own music that you kind of forget what's happening. I remember Unsuk Chin once saying that when she's writing, it's almost like the whole world around her doesn't exist, and it's not until a long time afterwards you reflect on the piece and you can go, oh wow, I didn't realise that about my own music. I think something, you were saying tunes earlier, something which comes from my brass band heritage, which is why I'm into brass so much, is the tunes. I grew up playing all of these wonderful melodies within a brass band because that's what the heritage is. And I guess through this piece in particular, the kind of constant evolving of this one melody and how that kind of goes off into its many worlds, and the complexity actually comes from looking at that one melody or one harmony and kind of really focusing on it as if it was this kind of 3D object, and looking at it from every different prism, every different perspective, and how that can weave in and out and kind of create these layers of complexity, but whilst having a complete organic nature of it being from one specific source.
So what you talk about your own piece, is it fair to say that maybe there's a bit of randomness in your writing process?
Oh, interesting.
Or experimenting?
Interesting. This piece in particular, I don't think's random at all, actually. That's such an interesting way of looking at it.
Because I always wonder about that. So, because when you sit and write, because in your, in your piece, you have these very simple melodies that go around, and you talk about a prism, and you talk about inspecting it from different angles. So, practically on the stage, I experience that as, these tunes where instruments drop in and out all the time, and you have instruments doing opposite motions, as in like dynamics coming up and down, and that creates a whole third sound. You have these sort of interactions on stage that are very delicate and very beautiful. And I always wonder if that isn't, a little bit of sort of experimenting and seeing what's happened.
Yeah, I suppose for me, music always needs to feel like it's breathing in some way. I grew up by the sea, and literally by the sea, like my house was on the seafront. So you'd wake up and you'd spend all my childhood listening to the constant motion of the waves. And the more I reflect on my music, the more I can hear that in some way, and the kind of breathing motion and the feel of push and pull. And in a lot of my music, I think there is that kind of nature of overlapping, like you were saying. And I think something I'm really constantly trying to achieve is this two layers of motion where a lot is happening, but nothing is happening at the same time.
This particular piece, Dreams of Isolation.
Yes.
Can you say something about the title?
The piece actually started life before the Composers Hub scheme, actually. Mm-hmm. So I was working with the Sappho Ensemble, specifically Benjamin Powell and Jennifer Langridge, pianist and cellist, amazing performers. And I was writing them a piece and workshopping them, and I wrote the melody, in essence, in this piece, and it was just at that time called Isolation, and it was around the time of the first lockdown when I was on my own a lot, as a lot of people were, and it was kind of spending a lot of time with yourself and kind of meditating on that. And when the Composers Hub, I was accepted into the program, I was actually writing my first opera, and so there was a lot of music going on in my house at the time.
Yeah.
And the thought of writing a whole new piece it made me feel quite sick. So I took a lot of time, and actually I reflected on that piece I did for the Sappho Ensemble, and I thought, wow, there's something in this which can be looked at in a different way, because at that time it was very much melody and piano, melody and harmony. And I was thinking, well, what if I extract that one feature from it and then do look at it in all of these different ways? And I remember in the first workshop, it was still very much just an orchestration and really looking at the colour and balance of the ensemble, which is something I really wanted to experiment with. How can the instruments interact in a very different way? There's a piece by Oliver Knussen called Coursing, which he wrote for the London Sinfonietta, and it's basically the same principle of this one monody and how it interacts in different orchestration and colours and everything. So that was my basis of the orchestrational element to the piece. And then when I had to orchestrate it out for the larger ensemble, for the second workshop and now for the concert, it was like, okay, what is the other element to the piece? Like, how far can I push it? How far can I break it apart? And it was at that point, all of these kind of micro gestures, this micro polyphony, like Ligeti does in Atmospheres and so many great pieces. How can that come out in the music? And so I started coming into this different world, and it became more of a dreamlike nature. Hence, now it's Dreams of Isolation.
And now the piece, so you mentioned, it's before, it was written in the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah. So it's nearly 2 years old.
Yeah, I know, it's funny.
I've been speaking to a lot of composers, and many of them didn't notice that there was a pandemic on, because they were just sitting at home anyway.
Interesting.
And what's happened since that piece?
Wow, I had the adverse effect that I noticed quite heavily. It really changed how I thought about music, how I thought about how we convey music, and I feel that I have to have something or some emotional pull or some other artistic jumping platform to create music. So actually being stuck at home was really quite damaging for me, and I know I mentioned the opera, which I was writing at the time, but since then I actually took a complete break from writing. This was the last piece I wrote on my undergrad with the opera. So I graduated at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, and I decided to have a complete break of writing, because it almost felt like I was emotionally exhausted from music. And for me, it felt like I'd just completely fallen out of love, that I'd listen to music and I wouldn't feel excited like I would. And it was quite scary for a long time. It was almost like the notes had disappeared. I started my master's degree at the Royal Academy of Music, and for the whole first term, nothing. And I was so scared that was it for me. Like, goodbye. But the more I started listening to other people's music, my contemporaries, the composers I'd never heard about, like Julius Eastman, this amazing American composer, and discovering more about myself, and also accepting more about myself as well. I've started to become more comfortable in what I want to produce, and not feeling like I have to fit into a mould. Like I was saying, the walls of crumbling down. And more recently, I've just written a string quartet for the Hill Quartet, and it's based on bluegrass music from Nashville, and the concept of the piece is like you're listening to this bluegrass music on a record player, and they're kind of going microtonally, speeding up and slowing down, and kind of really getting into the essence of the music. And it's like music I've never written before. For me, it feels completely fresh, and it's almost like I needed that space and time to kind of reset where I'm at, reset what I want to say, and this kind of also feeling that I don't always have to write serious music as well, because I think that's another thing is, like, I find myself funny. I'm not a very funny person, but I find myself funny. So, you know, wanting to do that in my music sometimes is okay as well. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I think pigeonholing anything is always damaging because serious music can very quickly become comedic itself.
Yeah, well, that's very true.
For a bad reason. So fair to say that you maybe depend on something being around you. You don't work in isolation.
No.
You depend on input.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
A lot of, quite a few pieces I do are based on like paintings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the first orchestral piece I did was with BBC Now, and years ago now actually, and it was based on this painting by a Welsh artist called Elfyn Lewis called Melis, which means sweet in Welsh. But the painting is like all of this acrylic paint kind of lumbered on top of each other, and it's dried, and it's almost like the painting is coming at you where it's like ridges. And for me, like looking at that, I can see it very musically, and it's those kind of connections which I find really inspiring, and finding how I can relate that into music.
Thank you very much, Jasper.
Okay,
Thanks for your piece.
Thank you.
I hope we get to play it many times in the future.
So do I.
Yeah.
Thank you.